Hello wonderful people, welcome to STEMed Lessons. In this video, we'll be talking about amino acids, specifically the 20 alpha amino acids. These are also called proteinogenic amino acids because these amino acids can be encoded by the human genome and for them to form as the building blocks for protein formation. Now, as I said earlier, there are 20 of them, and it helps to remember not just their names, but their structure and their abbreviations. For the abbreviations, there are two types. We have the 3-letter abbreviations and the 1-letter abbreviations. In this video, we'll be talking about all of these things for all 20 amino acids. And to remember the names of the amino acids, I have on the screen a coin saying that I use. Please feel free to modify them as much as you can to help you remember it. And remember that the weirder the mnemonic or the coin saying is, the better it is to keep it in your memory for a long time. So this is what we have. We have glaciers in Alaska valiantly look for isolated phenols in metals and tripped prolines. Sir Thor has a cyst in his thyroid as he glued aspartic acid to glutamic acid to look like Argentina's history. Now, as you can see, I have some of the first letters, maybe the second or third letters of each of these words highlighted. They are not necessarily the abbreviations for the amino acids. They are just there to help you remember them. Some of them are for the abbreviations, but not all of them. We will talk more about the abbreviations later on. Alright, so we have glaciers standing for glycine. We have alanine, valine, leucine, isoleucine, phenylalanine, methionine, tryptophan, proline, serine, threonine, cysteine, tyrosine, asparagine, glutamine, aspartic acid, glutamic acid, lysine, arginine, and histidine. These are the 20 amino acids. Next up, we'll be learning about the structure and the abbreviations for all of these amino acids. Alright, the first amino acid we'll be talking about is glycine. But before that, let's learn about the general structure for all amino acids. Now, all amino acids have a central carbon called the alpha carbon, and that is attached to 4 groups. We have the carboxylic acid group, the COOH. We have the amine group, the NH2. We have a hydrogen. And then we have finally the R group. Now the R group is what changes for each of the amino acids. So different amino acids have different R groups, and that gives them their specific properties and identities. So every amino acid has these 3 groups on the outside and then the R group right there. Now, most of these amino acids have the alpha carbon as chiral. We will see later on that with the exception of glycine, which has an achiral alpha carbon, all of the other 19 amino acids have a chiral center for the alpha carbon. What this means is that it's attached to 4 different groups. So we see this group, that group, this, and then the R group. These are 4 different groups attached to the chiral center, which is the carbon. Glycine is the only exception, that is achiral. So let's keep that in mind. All right, with that said, let's get back to the structure for glycine. So as usual, glycine has a 3-letter abbreviation as GLY and then a 1-letter abbreviation as G. Now, just like all the other amino acid, it has a carbon in the middle attached to 4 groups. It has the carboxylic acid group, the hydrogen, the NH2 group, and for glycine, the R group is just a hydrogen. And because it has 2 hydrogens attached to the carbon, this makes the carbon achiral. So glycine has an achiral carbon center attached to 4 groups. The next amino acid we will be looking at is alanine. Alanine. The 3-letter abbreviation for alanine is ALA, and the 1-letter abbreviation is just an A. For alanine, the R group is a methyl group, a CH3 group attached to the carbon center. And as you can see, these 4 groups are different, and so the carbon center is chiral for alanine. The next amino acid we'll be looking at is valine. So glaciers in Alaska valiantly. The valiantly is for valine. Valine. Valine has a 3-letter abbreviation of VAL and a 1-letter abbreviation of just a V. Now the R group for valine is a carbon attached to 2 groups, and these 2 groups are CH3 groups, so methyl groups attached to a carbon. Now remember that carbon is supposed to be attached to 4 groups, so this carbon has 3 groups attached, and then it has a hydrogen, making it attached to 4 groups. And this is the structure for valine. The next step, or the next amino acid we'll be talking about, is leucine. Leucine. Now, leucine has a 3-letter abbreviation of LEU and a 1-letter abbreviation of just an L. And the R group for leucine is a carbon attached to another carbon, and this carbon has 2 groups attached to it, 2 CH3 groups. And then to complete it, this carbon has 3 groups attached, so we have a hydrogen. This one has 2 groups attached, so we have 2 hydrogens attached to it. And this is the structure of leucine. It's similar to valine, except it has 1 more extra carbon in the chain before the 2 carbons attached to it. The next amino acid is isoleucine. Isoleucine, which is an isomer of leucine. So if we know the structure for leucine, we should know the structure for isoleucine. The 3-letter abbreviation for isoleucine is ILE, and the 1-letter abbreviation is just an I. For the R group, we have a carbon attached to a carbon, and if it was a leucine, we would have had 2 carbons attached to it, but this time it has only 1 carbon, and the other carbon is on this first carbon here, which is why it's an isomer. It's a structural isomer for the leucine. Now to complete it, this carbon has 1 group attached, so we have 3 hydrogens added to it. This carbon has 3 groups, so it has only 1 hydrogen. This has 2 hydrogens, and this has 3 hydrogens attached to it. Now this is the structure for isoleucine, an isomer of leucine. The next amino acid we'll be looking at is phenylalanine. Now, phenylalanine, as the name suggests, has some sort of a benzene ring, the phenyl, and it also has some sort of alanine attached to it. So phenylalanine. Let's write the name right there. Now, the 3-letter abbreviation for phenylalanine is PHE, and the 1-letter abbreviation is an F. For the R group of phenylalanine, we have a C. If it was just a CH3, that would be an alanine, but then it's attached to a benzene ring. So that's the phenyl part. There we go. And this carbon has 2 hydrogens attached. So this is the structure for phenylalanine. It has a CH2 group attached to a benzene ring. The next amino acid we'll be looking at is methionine. Now, methionine is one of 2 amino acids that has a sulfur attached to it. Methionine. What helps you remember is the thio, standing for sulfur, in the structure. Now, the 3-letter abbreviation for methionine is MET, and the 1-letter abbreviation is just an M. Alright, so the R group for methionine, as we said, it has a sulfur in there, but we start with a carbon attached to a second carbon, and that is attached to a sulfur group, and that is attached to a third carbon, like that. And then to fill everything in, this carbon will have 2 hydrogens. The sulfur is attached to 2 groups, that's what it needs, and the last carbon has 3 hydrogens attached to it. So this is the structure of methionine. The next amino acid we'll be looking at is tryptophan. So we have glaciers in Alaska valiantly look for isolated phenols in metals, methionine, and tryptprolines. So the next one is tryptophan. Now the 3-letter abbreviation for tryptophan is TRP, and the 1-letter abbreviation is a W, like tungsten. Okay. For the R group for tryptophan, we have a carbon attached to another carbon, and this second carbon is in a 5-membered ring, like this. And that in itself is attached to a 6-membered ring. Like this. Now we need to make a little modifications to it. The bottom part here is a nitrogen. And this 5-membered ring is just a benzene ring. So we have this, that, this. And then this is a double bond here. So we have a carbon-carbon double bond attached to a nitrogen. Remember, nitrogen is supposed to have 3 bonds, and so we have a hydrogen right there to have 3 bonds attached to nitrogen, and this 5-membered ring attached to a 6-membered ring. And this, let's not forget, this carbon has 2 hydrogens attached to it. This carbon already has 4 bonds, 1, 2, 3, 4, so it has no hydrogen attached to it. And this is the structure of tryptophan. So it has a 5-membered ring attached to a 6-membered ring. The next amino acid that we'll be talking about, so tryptprolines. So the next one is proline. The 3-letter abbreviation for proline is PRO, and the 1-letter abbreviation is just a P. Okay, let's get rid of these. Now, proline's structure is also slightly different from the others in the sense that it has a ring circling back to the nitrogen in the amine group. So we have a carbon. Now, it's a 5-membered ring, okay? So we have a carbon here, and then we have this nitrogen attached to a carbon, and we have a 5-membered ring, so we have a carbon here as well. Now, to finish everything off, this nitrogen has to be attached to 3 groups, so we attach a hydrogen. This carbon has 2 hydrogens attached, 2 hydrogens attached, 2 hydrogens attached. And this is the structure of proline. The next amino acid we'll be looking at, so tryptprolines, and then the abbreviation goes serthor. Ser is for serine. So we've got serine as the next amino acid. The 3-letter abbreviation is SER, and the 1-letter abbreviation is S. We bring back the amine group like this, and then for serine is one of the amino acids that has an OH, a hydroxyl group attached. And so for the R group, we have first a carbon, and this carbon is attached to an oxygen in a hydroxyl group. Now we have 2 hydrogens attached to this carbon, and this is the structure for serine. It has a CH2OH attached to the alpha carbon. The next amino acid we'll be looking at is threonine, serthor. Threonine. Threonine is another hydroxyl containing amino acid. Let's write that, threonine. The 3-letter abbreviations for threonine is THR, and the 1-letter abbreviation is a T. Now for the R groups of threonine, or for the R group of threonine, it's kind of similar to valine in that it has a carbon that is attached to 2 groups. For valine, it would have been 2 methyl groups, but for threonine, it has an OH on one side and then a methyl group on the other side. This carbon has a hydrogen to complete, and this is the structure for threonine, another hydroxyl containing amino acid. The next amino acid to look at, so serthor has a cyst, so we are looking at cysteine. Before I clean up threonine, there is one thing I need to point out. Threonine has 2 chiral centers, so it's one of 2 amino acids that has 2 chiral centers. This carbon is attached to 4 groups, so it's a chiral center. As you can see, we have 4 groups attached to it, but this carbon is also a chiral center, if you've noticed it. It has all these groups on the top. It has a hydrogen, it has an OH group, and a methyl group. So it's attached to 4 different groups, and so it is also chiral. So that's something to keep in mind. So Cetho has a cysteine. Now, cysteine has a 3-letter abbreviation of CYS, and the 1-letter abbreviation is just a C. Cysteine is another sulfur-containing group. Remember we did methionine that had sulfur? Cysteine also has sulfur. The structure for cysteine is kind of similar to serine in that it has a carbon, and this carbon, if it was a serine, it would have been attached to an OH group, a hydroxyl group, but this is attached to a thiol group, an SH group. This carbon has 2 hydrogens, and this is the structure for cysteine. The next amino acid we'll be looking at is tyrosine. Now, tyrosine is another hydroxyl-containing amino acid. Tyrosine. The 3-letter abbreviation for tyrosine is TYR, and the 1-letter abbreviation is a Y because T is already taken by threonine. So we have a carbon attached to a benzene ring. If you remember correctly, if we leave this just as this, it would have been a phenylalanine. But for tyrosine, it has an OH group attached at the end. So this is the structure for tyrosine. It's a phenylalanine with an OH group in the para position of the benzene ring. The next amino acid we'll be looking at is asparagine. So Cetho has a cyst in his thyroid which is asparagine. Asparagine. The 3-letter abbreviation is ASN, and the 1-letter abbreviation for asparagine is just an N. Now for the R group of asparagine, asparagine is an amide-containing amino acid. So it has a carbon, and this carbon is attached to another carbon that has a double bond to an oxygen and a single bond to an NH2 group. So this is an amide group attached to this carbon, which has 2 hydrogens. So this is the structure of asparagine. The next amino acid is glutamine. Glutamine is similar to asparagine. The only difference is that it has 2 CH2 groups before the amide group. So glutamine. The 3-letter abbreviation for glutamine is GLN for glutamine, and the 1-letter abbreviation is a Q. Okay, so like I said, glutamine is similar to asparagine, but for the R group it has 2 CH2 groups before we have the amide group. So a carbon double bonded to an oxygen, and then it's bonded to an NH2 group, like so. So this is the structure for glutamine, GLN as the 3-letter abbreviation and Q as the 1-letter abbreviation. The next amino acid we'll be looking at, so as he glued aspartic acid to glutamic acid. So we have aspartic acid as the next amino acid. Now, aspartic acid is one of 2 amino acids with a carboxylic acid group attached in the R group. Okay, so we have aspartic acid. So we have the 3-letter abbreviation as ASP and the 1-letter abbreviation for aspartic acid as a D. All right, for the R group of aspartic acid, we have a CH2 group attached to a carboxylic acid group. So COOH, like so. So this is the structure for aspartic acid. Glutamic acid is the next amino acid we'll be looking at. Glutamic acid. The 3-letter abbreviation is GLU, and the 1-letter abbreviation for glutamic acid is an E. Now, like I said, glutamic acid has an R group similar to aspartic acid. The difference is that just like with glutamine and asparagine, it has 2 CH2 groups before the carboxylic acid group. Okay, so we have a second CH2 group before the carboxylic acid group, COOH. Now this is the structure for glutamic acid. Now the 1-letter abbreviation for glutamine, asparagine, glutamic acid, and aspartic acid can be a little bit confusing. What I used to remember is that in the alphabet, N comes before Q. So asparagine will take the N before glutamine takes the Q. And for the 2 acids, D comes before E in the alphabet. So aspartic acid will take the D and glutamic acid takes the E. Hopefully this helps. The next amino acid we'll be looking at is lysine. Lysine is a basic amino acid. It's a base. The 3-letter abbreviation is LYS, and the 1-letter abbreviation is a K. Now, for the R group of lysine, we have a carbon attached to a second carbon, attached to a third carbon, attached to a 4th carbon, and then it's attached to an NH2 group. So we have 4 CH2 groups, and that is attached to NH2 groups. Sometimes the structure of lysine can be a little bit confusing in remembering how many CH2 groups. What I use is to remember the letter K. K has 4 points or 4 tips. So that helps me remember that it has 4 CH2 groups before the NH2 group comes in. So lysine has this structure, and its base, because of the NH2 group, it can accept a proton to become NH3 plus. All right. Next, we have arginine. The 3-letter abbreviation for arginine is ARG, and the 1-letter abbreviation is an R. Now for the R group of arginine, we have a carbon attached to a second carbon, attached to a third carbon, and this carbon is attached to a nitrogen, which is in turn attached to another carbon. But this carbon here has a double bond and a single bond. The double bond is to a nitrogen with an H, and then the single bond is to a nitrogen with 2 H's, because nitrogen is supposed to have 3 bonds each. So this nitrogen over here has 2 bonds. I'm going to add a hydrogen, and then for this carbon it needs 4 bonds. So we add 2 hydrogen here, 2 hydrogens here, and 2 hydrogens here. So this is the structure for arginine. It has 3 CH2 in a row, and then you have an NH connected to a carbon that is double bonded and single bonded to amine groups. The structure for arginine can sometimes be confusing, because you might wonder how many methyl groups, how many CH2 groups come before the NH group. What you could use to remember is the letter R, which is the abbreviation. If you want to write R, you follow 3 steps. It goes like this: first step, second step, and third step. This is what I use to help me remember that we have 3 CH2 groups before the NH and the carbon comes in at the end. Okay. So the final amino acid we'll be looking at is histidine. The 3-letter abbreviation for histidine is HIS, and the 1-letter abbreviation is just an H. Now for the R group of histidine, we have a carbon that is attached to another carbon, and this carbon is in a 5-membered ring. It is attached on one side, it has a carbon, on the other side it has a nitrogen. Now this carbon-carbon bond is a double bond, and this carbon is single bonded to a nitrogen, which is single bonded to a carbon, and this carbon is double bonded to this nitrogen over here. So we have a carbon-carbon double bond and a carbon-nitrogen double bond in this structure. Now nitrogen is supposed to have 3 bonds, and so this nitrogen on the left side, we will add a hydrogen to it. The other nitrogen already has 3 bonds, and so that's okay. Now we fill in the hydrogens on the carbon so that we fill them up with 4 bonds. Okay, so this is the structure for histidine. Alright, so that is it for all 20 amino acids. We know the structure, the 3-letter abbreviation, and the 1-letter abbreviation. Thank you for listening, and if you have any comments or suggestions, please let me know in the comment section down below, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye.